this video, we're going to review the balance reports. Now, after a balance scan, you'll be presented with a standard report and various report options. And in this video, I'll talk about how to analyze and interpret these reports. Now, you can see at the top of this report is a nice little cover sheet that's been created for you that has your practice's information and also your client's information. And you can see here that I've just put in a sample client. You can also see where the return appointment would appear if you had put in a return appointment date. Now, the other thing to note here is that there's multiple reports that have been generated based on the data that has been collected. And I can pull any of these up by clicking on Select Reports. And there's two specific reports for chiropractors, one with services and one without services. We also have the same for the acupuncturist. And we also have a report called the Advanced Report and the Advanced Report Plus Teeth. Now, the Advanced Report Plus Teeth is the most comprehensive report. We also have a report that shows the body's response to all the products called All Products by DR, and a report that lists the out-of-range EAV points. Now, the purpose of some of these other reports is that you might decide that it's better to not give your client all of the information that you've collected. And so looking at a standard report or report specific to your type of practice can limit the information and make it more user-friendly for the client. But the advanced report is where you're going to get the most comprehensive information as a practitioner. If you understand how to read the advanced report, you'll be able to understand the other reports. For that reason, I'm going to focus on the Advanced Report Plus Teeth. So let's click to select that report. The first thing that we have is the dynamic profile. You can see the red dots here, and these represent virtual items presented to the body that the body had an out-of-range response to. The green dots, on the other hand, represent those virtual items that the person had an in-range response to. Here you can see the total number of biomarkers, which in this case it's a male, and so there were 120. There would be 121 for a female client. In addition to the range value, you can see the number of biomarkers that were in range, which is 58, and the number of biomarkers that were out of range, which is 62. Now, this dynamic profile is not an indicator of overall health or wellness. It's more of an indicator of that person's ability to deal with the biomarker scanned for at that particular point in time. And it's not uncommon to have anywhere from 40 to 60% of these stressor virtual items out of range. The purpose of the dynamic profile is to actually show how product virtual items influence the stressor virtual items that are out of range. So in this case, as I scroll through the product scanned, you can see that the Bio-B with C actually brings 42 of the 62 items into range. And as we go down the list here, you can see that the second product, the Beta TCP, brought an additional 17 items into range. So now we only have 3 items that are currently out of range, and the last product that brings everything into range is the purified chondroitin sulfates. Now, the other point that I want to point out, kind of going back to this concept of using inventory, which was discussed in the previous video, you can see here that the categories in the case of the Bio-B with C is a general wellness product. And because we put all of the biotics research products in inventory, it actually shows up as inventory. Now, if you just used your inventory for the item that you actually have on your shelf, inventory will then appear on the report and be an indicator that that's a product you normally stock. If you didn't have an inventory next to it, that would be an indicator that you don't normally stock that item and that you could then make plans to order that product for the client. I also want to take a moment to talk about range. Just to review, the range is determined by measuring those 35 neutral virtual items, and it's calculated at the beginning of every biosurvey. The range is a process of identifying the body's normal response level. Everything in range might be thought of as something the body can handle on its own. The things that are out of range are the things that are unusual responses that the body might need some sort of support for. With the majority of clients, the range will fall somewhere between 5 and 20, but there are occasions when you'll have ranges higher than 20 and lower than 5. And to illustrate what that might be an indicator of, I'm going to tell you a story. Now, when I'm in my little cocoon and in my normal routine here at ZYTO, I typically have a range between 5 and 8. I noticed, however, that when I travel, I actually had my range go as high as 35. Now, if you take a look at what happens when you travel and the additional stress load that occurs when you travel, it might give you an understanding of why my range got up to 35. When I travel, I have to commute further to get to the airport. I have to deal with traffic, so I'm more stressed. When I get to the airport, I have to go through security and go through their electromagnetic device that can cause stress on the body. I also have to have the stress of worrying about catching my flight and getting to the right gate. And of course, when I get on the plane, there are several things that occur. I'm exposed to a bunch of people with different viruses and bacteria. The air is really dry, so it dehydrates the body. There's also radiation energy going through the plane that might cause the body stress. And then there is a change in elevation that might cause the body some additional stress. Of course, on the other side, when you land, you might not eat food that you normally eat. When you walk into a hotel, you breathe in this nice villa aroma fragrance. Those are actually chemicals that might be harmful to the body. So in this example, I've identified several different ways in which the body is dealing with additional stress when I travel. And it's a logical reason why the range may actually be higher. So when I see a high range, I don't come to the conclusion that the person is unhealthy, but I start to ask additional questions to see if there is additional stress that they might be under, and to help identify those factors and maybe give suggestions to better manage that stress. Now, on the opposite side of the spectrum, we have a really low range. What I would consider to be a low range is anything under 3. Now, with a really low range, that may actually happen for all the same reasons as when you see a really high range. A low range could possibly mean that the body has gone to an exhausted state, where it's exhausted dealing with the additional stress load and it becomes less responsive. One of the reasons why the range value is so important is that when we look at that data in the report, it can give us an idea of how the body has responded to an item in comparison to the range. So in this example, the range was 8.8. And you can see there is a unique number next to each one of these products. The Bio-B with C had what we call a deviation ratio, or DR value, of 69.67, whereas the beta TCP had a value of 44.94. So you can see the body had a much greater coherent response to the Bio-B with C than it did the beta TCP. I commonly use the example of using muscle testing to identify what products somebody should take. Now, this is an oversimplification, but it illustrates the point. Typically, when you muscle test, there's kind of a yes or no response. If we test for a product and the muscle goes weak, that's an indicator it's a no response. If the muscle holds strong, that's an indicator of a yes response. Based on the client's body and how it responds to the balance virtual items, you can see to what degree the body is having a yes response, and on the opposite end of the spectrum, to what degree the body is having a no response in regards to a specific virtual item. A very important concept to understand is the difference between balancer virtual items and biomarker stressor virtual items, and how to interpret the DR value in regards to these two groups of virtual items. As discussed earlier, when you interpret the results on balancers, the virtual item with a positive DR are considered balancers. The range does not impact how we look at the results on balancer virtual items. However, with biomarker stressor virtual items, whether or not the results are positive or negative is not as relevant as whether they have a numeric value that is higher than the range. As an example, if you have a range of plus or minus 7.43, any biomarker stressor that has a DR value that is greater than plus or minus 7.43 is considered an out-of-range response. The more out of range an item is, the more weight we give that virtual item when analyzing the results. It's important to recognize that the range value is an absolute number. In mathematics, absolute value is defined as how far away a number is from 0. As an example, -10 is 10 away from 0. If we have a range of 8.88 and any number between -8.88 and +8.88 is considered an in-range response. The next part of the report shows the organ biomarker bar chart, and here they are just arranged in alphabetical order, and you can see in this situation gallbladder and heart are out of range. So it's possible that gallbladder was a negative number and heart was a positive number, but they are both out of range since they both have a DR higher than plus or minus 8.8. In this example, you can see that large intestine actually had what we call a non-response because the DR value was 0. Now you may interpret this as either a balanced response or an exhausted response in regards to that virtual item. To tell the difference between the two, whether it is balanced or exhausted, you'd want to look at other data points in regards to the large intestine. So as an example, there might have been products that might have been good for digestion or specifically the large intestine. You can see that the gallbladder virtual item was out of range, so the beta TCP may be a leading product virtual item in regards to gallbladder. But were there any products that were also good for large intestine? Now I would guess that the beta TCP also has a positive effect on the large intestine. So here I'm connecting the dots of what products showed up, and does that product correlate with the organs, glands, and systems that were out of range or had a 0 response? And that's the information that's going to help you make better wellness decisions for the client. This example also illustrates why you can't take any single scan result and use it to diagnose. ZYTO is decision support technology that gives the practitioner more information, but remember that it does not replace the practitioner. The next screen here shows the vertebrae biomarkers. Now here you can see which vertebrae biomarkers are out of range. In this case we have some that are just out of range, and we have TH2, which is more significantly out of range. We also happen to have a couple TH6, L2, and S3 that have a 0 DR response. So those are things I might want to take into consideration. The next chart is the tooth chart, where you can see which teeth biomarkers are out of range. Then we also have what's called the TCM meridians, which stands for traditional Chinese medicine, and consider what's out of range there. Then we can also see which virtual items from the services collection we created earlier that the body shows the most coherent response for. Now in looking at organs, glands, and systems, teeth, vertebrae, and TCM meridians, we have a unique tool called the Vectors tab. And if I click on the Vectors tab, you can see this is an interactive page where if I click on gallbladder, you can see which teeth are connected to gallbladder and so on. A metaphor that I commonly use is that the body is similar to the wiring in a house. So in a house you have a circuit breaker, you have a wire going from the circuit breaker to the light switch, you have wiring going to the outlets, and then you also have wiring going from the light switch to the light. And then of course if there's an issue anywhere along that circuitry, it can cause the breaker to blow. So for this analogy, let's take the gallbladder as our example. The gallbladder could be considered the circuit breaker. Then you have vertebrae that might be considered the junctions for the wiring. You have the teeth that also might be considered junctions for the wiring. And then you have the TCM meridians, which might be considered the wiring. And if there is anything wrong anywhere along the circuit, it can stress the rest of the circuit or the other items that are currently on the circuit. Now, one of the ways that is helpful to identify whether something might truly be considered as a potential stress is to look at all the items on that circuit. If there are vertebrae, teeth, and meridian virtual items out of range on the same circuit as the gallbladder, it's a strong indicator that that circuit is under stress and could possibly use some support. And that may be of value because you can start looking at how to support the entire system by taking all the data points into consideration. All right, going back to the report, there are other key data points that you want to take into account. the service virtual items that the body showed a strong coherent response to, and then also what product virtual items the body had a strong response to, can be valuable data points in helping you identify which systems of the body need support. As I scroll down here, we have another chart. We call this the biomarker progress chart. And as you can see here, we have the baseline response. Remember, I had 62 biomarkers that were out of range when we did the scan. We then put the BioB with C into circuit, and after rescanning those 62 biomarkers, it left 20 items out of range. Now if we scroll down here, we can see which biomarkers were brought into range with each product. One of the benefits of this chart is that we can see which biomarkers are taking the most effort to bring into range. In this case, that might be the virtual item for the gallbladder. I can also see that the gallbladder meridian is out of range, so I have some correlating data points there. But I am identifying what we call stubborn biomarkers that took more effort to come into range. And these stubborn biomarkers might be indicators to ask further questions of your client. Now as we come down here, we also have the top 5 virtual items based on probability factor. This section of the report shows your 5 most reactive virtual items after all response data was analyzed. So in essence, this is kind of doing the vectoring work for you, and you can see which of these points in regards to all the data connected to that circuit might also be out of range. Here it's indicating that the EAV point for parathyroid is something to really consider. You can also see that we have gallbladder as an EAV point, which is a consistent trend in this particular scan. The other thing that I will point out is that we have parathyroid and T9, but then we also have the triple warmer meridian, which also has to do with the parathyroid. So it might be another area that I want to look at. So the thing to consider on the report is identifying the trends, the patterns that you see, things that relate to one another, and the correlating data points that will give you a deeper understanding based on how the body responded to all the virtual items, both balancers and biomarkers. Now I'm going to come up here to select reports, and I'm going to choose all the products by DR. And I want to tell you another story that kind of illustrates my point here. A year ago, I was at a trade show scanning a chiropractor, and this guy was in very good shape. You could tell he worked out and had a very low body fat percentage. He sat down, and as we completed the scan, we were going through the biomarker progress report, and we could see that the top 3 products that his body had the highest coherent response to were all for blood sugar handling. And he looked at me and he said, well, I don't have problems with blood sugar handling. You know, that's never been an issue for me. And I'm not sure why those products have appeared at the top of this list. And I started to ask a couple of questions, and one of the questions I asked is, what did he eat for lunch today? And he got this big grin on his face, and he said, well, I just ate 2 brownies and a Coke. So in this real-time scenario, his body may have been having a difficult time processing the sugar. It's not something that he would normally eat, so being able to ask an additional question, I was able to learn more and suggest that this was likely an acute response to what he just ate. Now again, that's what the ZYTO balance is really about, is giving you the data points to help you ask better, more individualized questions to reveal key information. Now, in real time, our body deals with both acute issues and chronic issues, and the ZYTO balance system helps you gather information about the body that can be used to help you better understand your client's situation. And the more data points that you have in regards to a particular body, part of the body or area of the body, the stronger the indication that the body is dealing with a chronic issue versus an acute issue. And so by taking that data in and asking some additional questions, you will now have a better idea of what might be chronic and what might be acute for that client when you move into your diagnosis stage later on. The other thing that I like about the All Products by DR report is that it gives me an opportunity to look at all those virtual items, and if there are multiple products that address a similar issue that are at the top of this list, that could be an indicator that the body needs additional support in that area. As an example, if there are 5 product virtual items that contain vitamin D that appear in the top 10 to 15 products, that might be a strong indicator that vitamin D could be a beneficial supplement for that person. When you see this, you might recommend they use one of the vitamin D supplements, the one with the highest positive DR value. And then you could recommend other products that correlate with the information you are seeing on the report. By doing this, you can avoid redundancy between products and can give your client the best combination of products. Okay, now as I scroll down the list here, you're going to see that the DR value goes from a high positive number all the way down to 0. Once we reach 0, it then goes into the products that I had a negative coherent response to. Now, anything that has a 0 DR or positive DR may be considered as a possible balancer. Anything that has a negative DR would probably be a product that you wouldn't recommend as a possible balancer. So that's a basic overview of how to understand the balance reports. If you want to learn more, you can check out the Understanding ZYTO Reports webpage at ZYTO.com, Understanding ZYTO Reports. Thanks for watching, and remember that as you continue to scan, you will become more comfortable making better wellness decisions as you identify the trends and patterns in the data.